From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to the last Film Music Live of 2022. It's the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here. When cinematic storytelling runs in the extended family, it isn't hard to deduce that the cousins making a particularly splashy killing are composer Nathan Johnson and writer-director Rian Johnson. Like a latter-day sequel to The Fabelmans, Nathan and Rian spent the better part of their childhoods making movies for friends and family, a collaboration that certainly wasn't a home movie anymore, when Nathan created an impressively unique industrial noir score for Rian's high school take on the film noir genre with 2005's Brick. Swiftly getting Hollywood acclaim for a beyond clever mystery, Nathan would go on to score Rian's Eastern European con game as played by the brothers Bloom, and rev up his mechanically tuned time travel engines for Looper. In his own orbit, Nathan Johnson's impressive soundtracks included the sexaholic adventures of Don John, the apocalyptic Young Ones, delivering a rocking, futuristic punk superhero for the video game Infamous, and entering a reborn Nightmare Alley for director Guillermo del Toro. But nothing carved up pop culture for Nathan like reteaming with Rian for 2019's Knives Out, a deliciously seditious, peppily orchestral, modern-day take on all-star Agatha Christie mysteries, here headed by the world's greatest detective by way of Foghorn Leghorn, Benoit Blanc. Now the game is afoot again for the Johnsons and Benoit with The Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery, which ups the ante in lavish locations, as well as the playfully gothic, rambunctiously curious energy of Nathan Johnson's scoring. At once sleek, comically pokey, and literally smashing, as Benoit uncovers murder with the COVID-era ranks of the traitorous friends of a diabolically glad-handing tech bro. Deducing the mind-breaking puzzles with melodically percussive aplomb, Glass Onion serves up the clever high spirits and style that have distinguished the family plots of the Johnson cousins. And now let's welcome the composer with a clue, Nathan Johnson.
Hey, Daniel.
Well, it's great having you here. Congrats on Glass Onion's amazing success. I think one of the Netflix's most viewed movies ever. Again, like the Fabelmans, I imagine you probably would have seen it at this point. Did you relate to that in terms of your childhood with Rian?
I actually haven't seen it yet. I've been so excited to see it, but haven't got the chance. But yeah, from what I know, it's kind of how we grew up. I mean, Rian and I, from kind of since we were 10, we're making movies together, making music together, and we have a giant family. So we would enlist all of our younger cousins and siblings to be unpaid labor and actors in our movies. But yeah, it's kind of just, I guess it's just kind of continued.
What do you even have the idea that you would be a composer when you were kids doing these
Not at all.
movies?
No, not at all. And I mean, we really didn't even delineate. It wasn't like I was like composing the movies then. We were both just making movies, and then kind of separately we were both making music. So when he called me about Brick and asked if I wanted to compose it, I was thrilled and excited, but also kind of terrified because I didn't know what I was doing, which I think sometimes that turns out to be a benefit. And I think in the case of Brick, it very much felt like what Rian was looking for was not a traditional score, and we really leaned into sort of the world that I had been exploring from my music life at that point.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that no one had ever seen a film noir like Brick, and it's an absolutely brilliant movie. It's coming out again on 4K from Kino. But I mean, had you had any kind of musical training or any kind of just doing music on your own before Brick even came your way?
Not training, but lots of doing music. Yeah, I mean, I was in bands. I kind of come from the band producing songwriter world, so that was sort of the main thing that I was doing growing up. I was always writing and playing, but I just, up until Brick, I just kind of hadn't thought about doing it in that way. And as soon as I did, I mean, the thing is, I love storytelling so much. Like that's really the engine that drives all of these things. And so obviously, I mean, I should have thought about that, but it kind of just, as often is the case, it's not something you think about until it kind of wallops you in the head.
I mean, how did you even arrive at this? Because again, no one had really heard a score like Brick when it came out. How did you even arrive at such a completely atraditional sound for a
Yeah.
traditionally scored genre?
Well, I mean, the first thing was it was what the story wanted. Ryan and I talked about. Yeah, I always say, in once I understood what that high school was like, it was as if Ryan had written his ideal high school, where like everyone was listening to Tom Waits instead of whatever was on pop radio at the time. So it was very much. Sonically, I think what he wanted to do was go into slightly wonky, kind of out of tune, but the second thing was just like pure restrictions. I mean, he just basically kind of got donations from friends and family to make Brick. So the movie itself had almost no budget, which meant that we had basically nothing for the score. So we ended up recording the entire score just on my PowerBook with a single microphone in my apartment. So, instead of a string section, we were using tuned wine glasses, and instead of timpani drums, it was like hammering on filing cabinets in the hallway. And then I just kind of painstakingly, just because I didn't know how to do it a different way, I didn't really know about samples at the time. So I got friends together and just recorded everything live with a microphone and just constructed it just track by track and built it up. And I remember we got onto Ryan was on like the dub stage, and I think the dub mixer he talked to him. He said, "It sounds like there's real instruments in this score." Because a low budget movie at that level, I think they were just used to the score essentially being done with samples, but we just didn't know any better. It was kind of just doing what I had grown up doing, and trying to apply my brain to taking that with this movie.
And then with Brothers Bloom, you do a completely different klezmer score for these Eastern European, con artists.
Yeah, the way we talked about it was Bloom. If Brick was like the Junkyard Orchestra, Bloom was like that orchestra moved onto the back porch, and so it actually still sort of approached it in the same way. I mean, we were in a studio for Bloom, but it kind of was over like 3 months, and I would just get individual players to come in and record them, and again just kind of build it up track by track. So it kind of took me a long time till I till I got the sandbox to play in that most composers are probably familiar with.
And then in your next collaboration with Ryan, you get to, with all respect to Glass Onion, my favorite film, and I think a masterpiece,
Oh,
which
awesome.
is Looper. And again, you kind of get into a more traditional orchestral score with that film, but also it's just very odd and wonky with all the mechanical instruments that you're sampling for that film.
Yeah. So with Looper, we did use a string section and a horn section, but most of the score was basically constructed from field recordings. I moved down to New Orleans where we were shooting, and kind of just spent my days like wandering around the set with a field recorder and headphones, and wandering around the city. And then my good friend Ryan Lott at the time had been experimenting with creating contact instruments, and so he kind of like schooled me in the ways of creating contact instruments out of sounds, and I just brought my whole library of field recordings, and we kind of just created yeah, this industrial. It's sort of the sound of a broken down city. So, it's treadmills and industrial fans, and even the sounds of water running, or the guns from the movie, car doors slamming. It was very much, almost an exploration into definitely way more out there than Brick or Bloom in my mind. Also, especially because it wasn't a melodic score. It was very much in that world of sonic atmospherics.
Now, when Ryan does his next film, he didn't get the gig. It was pretty obvious who was going to do it. But now that you can actually demonstrate that you can have completely different music for Star Wars, as we saw Nicholas Patel do with the Andor, I thought pretty brilliantly. Had John Williams not been able to do it, or for whatever reason, and who knows, you might be doing one in the future. What would your Star Wars score be like?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, for me, like I just have a really hard time imagining Star Wars without John Williams. I feel like, in a very real sense, John Williams scored our childhoods, and so when Ryan got to do Last Jedi, thankfully I got to be there for some of the recording sessions, and it was just wonderful. I mean, not only is he one of the greatest film composers of all time, but he is such a lovely human being, and just getting to kind of just be a fly on the wall, watching the way he worked with an orchestra, watching the respect that all the players had in the room for him. It's more than just amazing music. It feels like this is a special man, and it's really, really cool to have gotten just a little peek into that. Yeah.
But in a way, though, you could actually score a Star Wars television series, or maybe even a film like Looper.
Sorry, say again.
In a way now, what's been proven is that you could actually score a Star Wars series.
Oh.
If they offer you one, you could score it something like Looper, essentially.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'd be thrilled. It's funny, and it's kind of fun that you bring this up, but it kind of maybe speaks a little bit to my process. I'm never when Ryan sends me a script, or when anybody, any director that I'm collaborating with starts talking to me about it, I'm not thinking about music at that point. I'm purely just, if it's a script from Ryan, I'm reading it as a fan. I love movies so much, and it's really fun to not come in ahead of time with preconceived ideas, and instead just kind of I don't know, just kind of like see what the story calls for. So yeah, I mean, I would love to do something like that, but would have no idea how I would even begin to approach it at the moment, because I feel like so much of a score's job in a movie is for the composer to be like a sounding board and a response to the director and to what they've written specifically.
Now, when Ryan sends you the script for Knives Out, what's your reaction?
I mean, I'm just like cackling. I clear the day and just read it and read it again, and it's, he's like one of my favorite writers. So I'm fully aware of what a pleasure it is and how rare it is to get a chance that early to see what his next world is going to be like. But 100%, I'm just reading it as a fan, and just in a way getting to experience the movie. And obviously the finished product is so many different layers that have been added on since the script, but he's such a good writer. It's kind of one of my favorite things to do.
And Knives Out was a really fresh, hip take on these kind of wonderful all-star Agatha Christie films you get in the early 70s, now performed with like this really great cast. And in a way, Knives Out is your most traditional score yet, where you really are working with the orchestra. What was that experience like? And in doing Knives Out, did you kind of feel how much you had grown and learned about the craft?
Yeah, it was honestly, well, so Knives Out was actually the first movie that I did a full orchestral score for, and that was, we'd kind of been dancing around in all of these very untraditional approaches. But for me, getting to work with the orchestra was kind of that. I was like, okay, these are my restrictions. Like we started out on Brick doing tuned glass instead of an orchestra, and here we were getting to work with some of the best players in the world at Abbey Road. So it did feel it felt kind of like a pinch me moment and overwhelming, but honestly, it was also kind of like, oh, this is why people do this way. This is why composers work this way. I just loved it. It was I think my most fun um, version of creating a score. And after doing that once, it was kind of just like, oh, I want to do this for forever. Like I getting to play on this stage with these people, with these amazing players, with these amazing engineers. It's so rewarding.
And that brings us to our first question from Louis Versinelli, and our first Glass Onion question. He's a big fan of your scores, and he'd like to know, when scoring a film like Glass Onion in a melodic motif way, do you think that is seldom used in film scores anymore? And who are some of the composers who inspired you to write a score particularly like this one?
Great. Yeah. I do think that. I mean, I feel like we grew up loving these film scores that were very melody focused and, motif based scores. And I do love the whole landscape of film music right now. And I love that, that there are 100 different ways to approach it. But as a kid, that was kind of my first love. And I do feel like that has sort of fallen out of vogue in the last 10 to 20 years, but man, thank God Rian loves melody, that he loves thematic themes or thematic based film scoring. And I think, probably some of the great, I mean, in terms of like leitmotifs, Wagner is kind of, the pinnacle of that, but also like theme-based film scoring, specifically melodic themes. I mean, obviously John Williams, but Bernard Herrmann. I love the Italians like Nino Rota and Morricone. All those would be kind of my heroes, and the stuff that I just love growing up.
Now, Ivan's got a very kind of specific question in that, with the Glass theme opening with a clavichord, sounds very 60s, 70s mystery thrillerish. Was it a happy coincidence for music lovers, or did you use any of them directly for inspiration, any particular scores from the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, so that was the harpsichord, which I think in Ryan's mind was really very much tied to the sound of mysteries for him. We were not really looking at a whole lot of mystery scores, but the one key one we were talking about was Nino Rota's score for Death on the Nile. And that, it's got such a great sort of fanfare, and the brass in that is amazing. Honestly, I was listening to a lot of like 60s and 70s French pop music, those sort of like tremolo, slippery strings. That was kind of the world for me. I was thinking about it. I mean, Ryan wrote this during lockdown, and we shot it right after the first vaccines came out. So I think everyone was actually feeling like these characters felt in the movie. We were just all kind of excited to get whisked away on an adventure in Europe. And that was what I was really trying to capture in the score, just that sort of image that we have of the most lush romantic Europe feel when we're locked down in America.
Now, Dan would love to know, what are some of the key instruments in your portable composing rig which brought you to Greece to compose Glass Onion while on location? What did you use?
Yeah, I mean, my portable composing rig is literally just a laptop and some samples and a small keyboard. It's nothing big. It's basically just something that I can have in a hotel room or whatever. But at that point, I'm mostly working with piano. it's not like I'm scoring at that point. I'm just exploring. So it's very much, for a movie like this that's theme based, it's very much about trying to find the melodies that are going to be resonant, that are going to stick in your heads. And occasionally I'll break into whatever samples my laptop can support. But at that point, all my stuff starts so rough. I have hundreds of voice memos of me like humming into my phone. And I think it would be very embarrassing to shine a light on where everything starts. But for me, it really is the melody strong, and is this something that we can essentially build a whole score around?
Now, Glass Onion has a particularly memorable kind of opening montage that Eric's got a question about. Now, with the cameo puzzle box fugue reveal, how did Baroque era counterpoint fugal techniques find their way into your score? And in many ways, a fugue is a puzzle, not unlike Glass Onion.
Yeah, it's I think Bach sort of is the master there, so you let him have his place, and I was very happy to get to dance around his little fugue in G minor. But I think that was something that Ryan and I talked about early on, that just the way that, and it's one of the things that I both love about his writing in general, but really specifically this. When he sent me the script, it's like not only a totally different mystery with totally different characters, but it's also structurally completely different from Knives Out, and that's very much on purpose. It is structured in a way that evokes the way a fugue works, and it was obviously a real treat to have Yo-Yo Ma cameo at the beginning to explain that. But yeah, I think my approach for that is, obviously we're nodding to it a little bit with the harpsichord and sort of that sort of very specific flavor of a classical vibe. However, and this is something I talk about a lot, really what we're living and dying by is, what are the dramatic stakes in this scene, and what are the characters feeling, and how do we need everybody to feel that? So I guess the answer is, I didn't go down this rabbit hole of trying to build this secret structure into the score at all. It would take a person much smarter than me to do that. I feel like the challenge of a movie is really to connect those emotional moments and make sure we're helping usher people through the film.
Now, in terms of the characters, Emma's got a question. Now, could you talk a little about the characters stealing each other's themes, and what was it like creating those aspects of the score? And was there ever any worry the audience may pick up on that in the first watch?
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, so theme stealing, it's something I've talked about a little bit, but it's something that I love. I first played around with it in Brick, where Laura's instrument steals Emily's theme. It's sort of at the end of that movie. There's like a change between the two, and it really worked in the context of what was happening in Brendan's brain at the moment, how he was kind of like replacing one with the other. And when we started working on the scene in The Glass Onion, where Miles is kind of talking about the picture with Blanc, and how much he misses The Glass Onion, it was something that I suggested to Ryan, like, what if at this moment Miles steals Andy's theme, sort of in the way that he's stolen Alpha, her company. And Ryan was, he kind of cackled with delight and was thrilled. But to answer the second half of your question, it's never something that I expect anyone to kind of pick up the first time they watch the movie, or maybe ever. But I do think it, when there's a chance to do it in a way that really makes sense for the story, but also makes sense for the emotion of the scene, which that one really did. It is a really fun way, because we're almost, when we're writing a thematic based score, we're training the audience to connect it, even if it's at a subliminal level. if we were connecting this motif with this character or with this feeling, when that gets superimposed on another character, even though you may not notice in your mind, I think there's like something emotionally that's going on there, hopefully, or maybe not at all.
Now, I really love the kind of tonal tightrope that this score and Knives Out works. Walks between being dark and funny, which brings us to a question from Fuller. Nathan, what was your overall approach to Knives Out, knowing it needed to be both serious, dark, and funny? Did you have any ideas that didn't work at the start, or did you land right in the final sound for the first film?
Yeah, so Knives Out, Ryan told me the idea like 9 years before he wrote it, but he didn't have it all developed, but he just kind of he actually told me the idea for the opening scene, and I knew that was going to be music, like a music-based thing. Um, and I knew it was going to be in a manor house, so I was kind of thinking we do this like very claustrophobic small ensemble. And as I was talking to Ryan, realized that was not what he was imagining. And I think, it's interesting. Like we start that with the quartet, but all of Knives Out, for the most part, is a big orchestral score. And Ryan's thought was, if we do everything really small, we're kind of already doing that in the house. So let's kind of explode that. Let's kind of fill in some of the big dramatic flourishes in this, because the house is so claustrophobic to begin with. But the other thing that we talked about was, and this was something that Ryan brought up, is he wanted it to be very cutting. He wanted the sound of the score to be super precise. And that's something that I love. I love the concept of imperfection. And, I love it in the quartet that starts Knives Out. It's kind of like a bow destroying piece, because I want to hear them scraping so much. I want to hear all of that imperfection and all of that tension. So I think that was, I'd love to say it was a master plan from the beginning, but I do think a lot of that came through sort of exploring what it wanted to be. And I think for me, if I think about the needle that we were trying to thread, it was about doing an orchestral score, but still having it feel very precise, where we could hear every melody line, every counter melody line. What we didn't want it to be was just kind of a blurry wash of sound. And I think, particularly for me, Bernard Herrmann's scores kind of exemplified that style of recording. When you listen to his music, I love it, because it feels like you can hear every musician playing.
Now, Oscar has a question that actually makes a good point, that both movies are very different in tone. How did you approach this in the sequel for Glass Onion?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I think I didn't realize until I got on set and realized like how funny this is. And we like Knives Out, obviously there's humor in that, but definitely in Glass Onion, it's it's tonally more over the top. Knives Out, we're in a very traditional manor house. We're in the most ridiculous mansion in the world with like the worst taste, so it's like very tonally different. And I think again, it was obviously, we knew we wanted to go bigger. We knew that we wanted to lean into the fun, but again, it was kind of trying to still not lose the precision. And when Ryan and I talk about these, it's definitely in the same world, but we really don't think of them as sequels. And so it was kind of fun to, I guess the way I thought about it was, it's not like I was going to suddenly do a synth score. We were still going to be in the world of Knives Out, but with a whole new cast, a whole new story. It meant we could really lean into, what to my ears feels like a more lush romantic flavor. And obviously we introduced harpsichord for the first time in this one, which also feels like a very Ryan idea. where we're in this modern tech billionaire's house, and we're kind of playing against that by welcoming us all into the movie with this very small, old-fashioned instrument.
Now, Chris Hadley would know. How did the theme motif for Benoit Blanc specifically develop from the first film to The Glass Onion? And did his music kind of inspire the rest of the approach to the score?
Yeah, so Blanc has a couple of themes. His hunting motif makes an appearance again in this movie, and Blanc's sort of main motif is there. It wasn't necessarily that I developed it all, and the way that we think about these movies is, although it appears to be the case from the outside, Blanc is not the main character. There's a different protagonist, and it's something that I think Rian really smartly kind of keyed into. Is the detective is not the person you want to be rooting for somebody else. So you know, when we did Knives Out, we weren't thinking that there was going to be a sequel. I was pleasantly kind of surprised and excited for this, because kind of the way I thought about it was, let's like bring his motif over and then just let that interact with a score that's 98% brand new material. And I think that will probably be the case with this world, is each movie is going to have a new story and new characters, and Blanc will be the through line. But a big part of what's compelling about that is, how does Blanc as a character interact with all of these other characters? And then in terms of The Glass Onion, I did, the Glass Onion, and I'm not sure if this is what you're meaning, but in terms of The Glass Onion itself, I did tap into to that thing we were doing with Brick, and brought back the tuned wine glasses a little bit for this. So yeah, it's obviously fun when you can kind of tap into, okay, this is like this very obvious thing that's going on here. Are there any ways we can tie into that?
Did you do the that Joseph Gordon-Levitt cameos in?
That was our brilliant music editor Joe Bond created the hourly dong with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's voice, and I keep thinking, man, we need to release that as a ringtone. That would I feel like that would kill for everybody's incoming calls.
One thing that's very different here is also the structure of the film, where essentially I think a couple million people have seen this, so we'll have spoilers, where the second half is a gigantic flashback. How did that influence the score?
Again, so what I didn't do is try to play the same music in a slightly different way when we're seeing the scene from a slightly different perspective. And again, I think, that partly, to me, that feels like it could be a red herring, and not the most fruitful path to go down, because honestly, in each of those scenes, although we're seeing visually mostly the same stuff, at that point the emotion that we're feeling is very, very different, because we're totally reinterpreting things. So my approach to those scenes were really to tap into what do we need to be feeling here. And that's not something, this is probably obvious, but worth saying, it's not something that I'm thinking about on my own. All of those are really, really in-depth conversations with Rian, where we're kind of talking through very much beat by beat. And these movies are scored to the scene, often off the grid. It's very much a dance with the characters, with what's going on, and so I'm really just trying to tap into, in this moment, from this perspective, what are we going to be feeling here, which is often different from the way we saw it the first time.
How did the idea of the Mona Lisa inspire the Baroque sound as well?
Not particularly, although I the way that I being a songwriter and coming from that world, the way that I often score a film melodically is I'll write lyrics, and so So the Mona Lisa kind of did play a key part in that, specifically in Miles's theme. And again, this is not something that gets out there, but maybe there's a resonance there. It's very much him kind of singing. Miles's theme is essentially him singing to the Mona Lisa, and it's that's obviously played such a key part in his life. But yeah, I think already I guess we're sort of in that world. Again, like I said, a synth score was not going to make sense for this movie and for this atmosphere.
Were you working with Edward Norton on the guitar?
No, he plays. He could do it.
What do you think of Tech Bros? I mean, we've been having some action with the Bitcoin stuff. I mean, and I just love how he summed that kind of personality up. And I imagine you may have run into people like that. What do you think of them?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny just listening to the way that he described it. I think is so smart. And what Rian said when he was writing, I know a lot of people have been, kind of talking about the parallels to certain key figures of the day. And, so I think one of Ryan's friends texted him, was like, "Did you write that movie last week?" So it kind of oddly feels more resonant today than when we were even shooting it. But I do love what Rian said, is anytime, just from his perspective when he was writing, anytime he started thinking about somebody specific, it instantly became very boring. And I think that really marks Rian's movies. He's obviously working in genres and kind of referencing these characters that we're all very familiar with. But I love that Edward is not doing an impersonation of anyone. It's kind of something that he's pulling from the soup that we're all living in, which is why I think it's so easy to kind of tie these lines together.
Now, one thing that that's really kind of deliciously seditious about this film is that usually these movies end with people, and kind of Knives Out did, where they're in a drawing room and Benoit or Perot or anyone is basically kind of deducing the crime, and then someone says, oh, "Okay, you got me." And then he basically loses. He walks out, and then someone completely trashes. There's no, just basically it's anger and trashing a place. There's no, like any kind of logic. Tell me, in that respect, that Dale would like to know, what can you share about the process of composing the killer string quartet that climaxes the film, and climaxes quite a bit of glassware?
Yeah. So, that was one of my favorite moments to score and to record as well. I worked with the Tippett Quartet again, and they're the string quartet in London that did the quartet piece in the first Knives Out. This time I had worked with them already, so I was writing specifically for the four of them to play it, and hopefully making it a little bit easier on them. But I just was so excited to get to come back to that. And I think, I know that the string quartet is very much the thing that marks the first movie. Like I was saying before, kind of coming at this with a blank slate, although I would have loved to do a new one in my mind at that time, I think I was not thinking about that. I was like, okay, what's this going to be? Let's just go with it. Thankfully, and this didn't happen until the edit, but Rian cut in the string quartet from the first one to that scene. And I just got really excited because it was, first of all, I love writing for a string quartet. I love the Tippett quartet. And it was just kind of like, okay, we get to do this all over again. The fun thing about it was, at that moment, I'm really tapping into Andy's very personal anger and rage, which I think a quartet going ballistic really does. But then as the scene progresses, we kind of back it up by a 70-piece orchestra just going bananas. And so that was kind of my doorway into that moment for the film, and just kind of knowing that this is the climax, knowing we're building up to this thing, and then we get to go back to this very trademark sound at this very key moment, from the Knives Out world. It was just so much fun.
Now, everyone would like to know, were there any parts of the score that you found more difficult to perfect than others?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of the main theme. The main theme, first of all, was the longest one to crack. I kind of took a few stabs at that, and it didn't really feel like what Ryan was after. And it was kind of like, okay, back to the drawing board. How can we tap into the romanticism even more? But also writing. This was the first time I've written for harpsichord, and that was really tricky. Um, for me as a composer, I one of my favorite things is dynamics, and and a harpsichord player will tell you that the harpsichord has dynamics, but for someone unfamiliar with it, it's not a lot of dynamics. It's very much on or off. So that was also something that I spent a lot of time. Gosh, the SketchUps for the harpsichord pieces. I just have so many different things, just kind of from scratch, just familiarizing myself with the instrument and trying to get a sense of how it works. And then Ian Farrington, our harpsichord player in London, when that I honestly I feel like that was the moment when he started playing the piece live in Studio One in Abbey Road. Um, that was kind of at the moment where I was like, oh, I love this. Like it felt, I don't know, it was great, like getting away from writing on samples, obviously, and hearing a real person play, kind of interpret what I had written gesturally and dynamically. It suddenly came alive to me.
Now, you've had a much bigger career than only Ryan's wonderful films. And, after Looper, you did Don John, you did Young Ones, which I thought was a really cool science fiction game. I love playing both infamous games.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
what was it like for you to kind of go off the reservation, as it were, and to deal with, fresh projects on your own?
I mean, I love it. Uh, the thing that marks all of those movies is they are directors. In a similar way to Ryan, they very much know what they want. It's something that I've talked about a lot. To me, the best collaborator is a leader who very much knows what they're making. Um, but creates a sandbox for you to then come in, and it's like, this is the world, this is a sandbox, these are the parameters. um, and then in those parameters they just are so collaborative and want you to do your thing. So Joseph Gordon-Levitt, we kind of met on Brick and became friends, and I've worked a lot with him. But he's an amazing musician himself, and he's obviously an incredible actor, but a great writer and director. So that felt very much the same world. Same with Jake Paltrow, who directed Young Ones. Such a clear director and such a lover of music that felt so similar. And I assume the next question, so I'll just jump there. But working with Guillermo, he's just a dream. And again, very similarly, it's a director who has a very singular vision. The nice thing about that is I'm not trying to figure out notes from 10 different people. All I really need to do, and it's the role that I very much consider myself as a composer, is to be a servant to the director. And when you have a good director, the director is being a servant to the story.
Well, you're Benoit, because you definitely guessed my next question, right? But I think what made Nightmare Alley maybe challenging for you was it was a replacement score. And what's the challenge of like coming into a situation like that? You don't want to make the mistakes that didn't make the first score work. You've got a limited amount of time and a really fairly challenging film to score.
Yeah, so I mean, those are all the things that you would think going into it, especially the time, because I think I had a month to write the Nightmare Alley score, from the I think from the time I first saw it. The thing that was amazing about that, and I mean, I was definitely like, there was trepidation there, but what totally overrode that was the excitement of getting to work with Guillermo. I mean, I was just like thrilled. What was awesome is Guillermo sent me the movie totally dry with no music, and my wife and I sat down and watched it. And at the end, we just turned and looked at each other. And that ending, I think, is an all-timer. But it was such a strong movie. It felt like it was so clear, and I felt like I know this character. I think I understand this character. And this this is sort of a weird thing because this doesn't usually happen to me, but almost in the first 10 minutes, I felt like I knew what the score wanted to be. Not so much sonically, but thematically. And when I met Guillermo the next morning for breakfast, and I told him my idea, but it wasn't like we talked about music a lot. I talked about his characters, and I talked about what he was saying with the movie, and it was not a meeting where I had to pretend to be excited. I was just like so thrilled, because, and I've talked about this before, but in Western storytelling, it is all about character arcs, right? The character starts here, and then they have this incredible experience, and they end in a different place. And what struck me so much about Nightmare Alley is Bradley Cooper's character starts out the movie here, and it's almost like he doesn't change, and he keeps like hitting that same note incessantly over and over again, even though all these different flavors and colors come in and push against him. He gets multiple opportunities to change and to step into a better life, and he's still hitting that same note at the very end of the movie. And to me, that felt like an incredibly fertile garden to work in, but also just so bold. And with storytelling that bold, it just felt to me like, I think from the very beginning, I think I know what this score wants to be.
Yeah, I know. And again, in a way, you just keep solving mysteries right from the starter to a guy who is the predestination. I can't even pronounce it correctly. That is his shtick in Nightmare Alley. To this, I have to tell you one thing. One thing I thought was kind of interesting that I really quite appreciated is that Glass Onion takes place in a COVID world, and
Yeah.
evidently Edward Norton has the cure for COVID. He's not sharing it. I don't know why.
No, I love
But
that thing.
what were the challenges? What were the COVID challenges of doing the score?
Yeah, I mean, it thankfully we had all gotten vaccinated, and then we went to Greece, and everything in Greece was outside. So I guess I'm talking now more about creating the movie. I mean, it was a nightmare for Ram, our producer, because if one actor got COVID, it would have shut everything down for 2 weeks, and then the whole thing, it's already a movie like this is such a tightrope act to pull off, and so that would have been devastating. But in terms of the score, by the time we were ready to record at Abbey Road, they were basically opened up. And it was, Nightmare Alley, we did all the sections separately and striped it, but it was awesome because especially for these movies, there's nothing like a whole orchestra playing live together in the room. I mean, I'm doing tons of crazy tempo ramping and lots of just like breathing and feeling stuff. So for those precise specific things, you can do it another way, but there's nothing like having having 70 people in the room together. It was amazing. So I kind of feel like we like miraculously landed sort of perfectly in between little open areas where we could still actually do it all.
Are you surprised by just how many people have watched this?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Netflix sent over the report, and I mean, surprised, but also we make these movies for our audiences, and it feels so fun it feels so fun for me. I mean, like at one level I'm involved with these, but I'm totally a fan. So to see other people appreciating this the way I appreciated when I first read it, and when I saw Ryan's first cut. Um, it's super gratifying, and also feels really fun to kind of share in that together with people.
One of the fun things that Netflix did for this was a big presentation where they spotlighted their movies, and they had like 6-minute orchestral suites with a live orchestra playing it, and it was just great. Literally hearing an orchestra do this. Now, given there's a whole new thing now of live musical performances, and just how musical Glass Onion is. Have there been any talks about doing this live?
Yeah, so we were just starting to talk about it for Knives Out when COVID hit, and then that all kind of, you know, went away or got put on the back burner. But I really hope so. I mean, and I said this earlier, but Ryan is a director that loves music, and he mixes it prominently, and it would feel like such a fun thing. Also, these movies play so well with a group of people. I can think of nothing better than to get an orchestra and a few hundred people together in a room and watch the movie and experience the music live. I really hope we get to do it.
Where does Benoit go after this?
I mean, that's exactly what I want to know. Are you kidding me? Checking my email every day for that script.
But where do you? I mean, obviously, I imagine this is definitely shown a light on just how far you've grown yourself as a composer, and to maybe doing more traditional stuff, but yet traditional. What do you want to do? What do you want to use the Glass Onion to do as a composer in the future?
Yeah, you mean in the Knives Out world, or
Or
just
just in the world, period. You as a composer for hire.
oh, I
What
mean,
do you want to do?
I know this sounds like a broken record, but honestly, like I wanna work on the best stories that I can. What it may sound, now it sounds dumb because I just kept talking about this thing, but when I'm getting ready to do a movie, I'm not thinking about what music do I get to do. What I'm thinking about is this an amazing story? And I was talking about someone so talking with someone about this earlier, but I think for me, uh, the music is not an engine that is strong enough to support a story that's not up to par. However, if there's an amazing story, that connection with a story is an engine to, I feel like, to generate any kind of music. It's not like I want to work in this world or that world necessarily. It is who's the director, who's the writer, what story are we getting to tell. That said, and I think maybe this was a little bit where you're going, man, I love working with an orchestra, and to have grown up, and for a lot of the first movies not doing that, there's nothing in the world like getting that range of color palettes to play with, and that level of amazing players. And I know that I don't come from that classical tradition, but for me to get to bring my sensibilities and then collaborate with players who are the best in the world and who can play anything, and to get to maybe push them towards ugliness in certain cases, towards imperfection in other cases. I mean, I like value and respect these players so much, and it still feels like pinch me to hear them bring to life what I've written. That to me it does feel like one of the most exciting collaborations.
Now, for my last question for you before I go out and find a couple of vases and break them, uh, where what do you think that this movie has to say about where you can take the genre of the drawing room mystery, how you score these movies? Especially with what Ryan has done with it, what you have done with it. Where do you think they go? The whole genre goes in that respect after
Yeah,
this.
you mean in our culture, or do you
I think
mean?
just like in a movie, in terms of mysteries themselves, get a bunch of well-known actors, put them together, have something fun happen. How
Totally.
far out do you think it goes?
I mean, I think far out. Ryan has said this again and again, that people sort of have in their heads that Agatha Christie wrote the same book again and again and again, but using this mystery to overlay on different genres, from from slasher to thriller, that all to the self-contained box. And I think Ryan said it, and I feel this way. I'm so glad that this is his approach. But if it doesn't feel compelling to him and challenging to him, he's not interested in going out and rehashing it. And it's, I said this at the beginning of our interview, but I love that he didn't just remake Knives Out. And I think that we're going to see him, just because I know Ryan. I think we're going to see him go in lots of different directions that will be surprising, and that makes it fun for me, taking someone who's as good of a writer as he is, and then giving them fresh worlds to play in. I can't imagine anything better.
Well, I just want to see the crossover between Knives Out and Looper. That's all I have to say. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us at Film Music Live. I want you all to watch Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery on Netflix, with Nathan's score available on Netflix Music. A big thanks to publicist Michael Moses, and to Mark Northam, Mark Banning, and our producer Dale Turner. And I'll be seeing you in the new year on the next Film Music Live.
Thanks so much. And thanks for all your questions. Bye-bye.